Hey there, everyone. Today, I wanted to do a video talking about the coming food shortages, the possible food shortages, the inflation right now, the higher food prices, the stuff that is likely, right now it's already getting bad. We're talking about 12, 15%, but it's something that is likely to get even worse in the coming months. And I wanted to talk about some things that we can do. And I know this is kind of one of those things in prepping that gets talked about quite a bit, but I think we're in a sort of a unique situation at this point in time because it is something that we're hearing when you hear the president talk about it, and when you hear the global leaders talking about the food shortages and all that, that there is something that we should be concerned about, because usually they're trying to minimize that and they're trying to tell us, hey, don't worry about that stuff. So when they start talking about it, it's something that is coming down the pipe and it's unavoidable. So in my opinion, I think it is something that is unavoidable. Now, what does it look like? How bad is it? I mean, all of those are different factors that we just have to kind of pay attention and wait and see how it unfolds. I think there's going to be a lot of other countries that get hit far worse than us. At least initially. So I think paying attention to those countries and seeing how that stuff is going is a good idea. But it doesn't mean that we are not going to be hit by this. And I think the American mentality of, oh, it can't happen to us, can't happen here. I think a lot of people have that. And unfortunately, a lot of those people are going to, kind of be a little bit surprised. It's interesting. I saw this on Quora. And I know this is just a couple people's opinions, and that's what Quora is, just people asking, but they said, are preppers right to be concerned about food shortages and all the consequences? And of course you get a couple preppers that are answering, and they're saying absolutely there is. But this one person down here, I thought this was pretty interesting. He said, I used to think they were crazy, but now I'm not so sure. The continuing shortages of PPE for medical personnel has shown us how dependent we are on the fragile supply chain. Who was the top producer of N95 masks when the pandemic hit? China. We think that America is the breadbasket of the world, so food should be no problem. But how is food produced? Where do fertilizers and pesticides come from? What about the parts for tractors, harvesters, refrigerated trucks, all of that stuff? And I think it brings up a really good point. You look at like the microchip shortages. You look at how this country used to be. The manufacturing and all of that stuff. We used to be basically self-sufficient. We used to make everything here. We used to do everything that we needed to be done here in the United States. These days, it's not that way. Everything comes from China. Everything comes from a different country. That we are basically a consumer economy now, not a producing economy. So I think when you're talking about the food shortages and all of that stuff, it really has the potential to be a bigger issue than it needs to be. Just like the gas prices right now. This is a bigger issue than it should have been or could have been because of the decisions that were made, by not producing ourselves. And it's the same type of situation when you're talking about food storage and all of that. So I found a couple articles that I want to go through today, and I wanted to touch on this because this one brings up a couple of good points about food storage and all of that. What are food shortages? We already understand that, so I don't know that we need to talk about. But this one right here, identify food shortage risks in your area. And I think this is an important one to think about because of a few months ago when a lot of this stuff started to come out, I was, you see a whole lot of stuff online with everybody showing empty shelves and the price markups and how much more expensive everything is. And I wasn't necessarily seeing it out here the way some people were. So I think it's important to kind of pay attention to this stuff. Now, fast forward a couple months down the line, and we are seeing that 12, 15% increase on ground beef, on beef in general, chicken, all of that stuff, even pet food. Everything has gone up between 10 and 20%, basically. So we are seeing that stuff. I haven't seen out here the shortages that a lot of people have seen around the world, around the country, or some people have seen. But that doesn't mean that it's not, not going to be that way. Maybe there was just a surplus out here or whatever, or maybe there is. But I think that, it's something that, like I said in the beginning of this video, when the government's telling you that there's going to be food shortages, you ought to pay attention, because they don't like to tell you anything that they don't have to. So it is one of those things that I am paying attention to on a daily basis, or whenever I go to the store, paying attention to what those prices are, looking at all the different shelves and seeing what shortages there actually are. And some with the stores, you got to look carefully too, because they'll pull all the stuff up front and they'll manipulate the shelves to make it look like they have quite a bit in stock, when in actuality there's not a lot there. So I'm always paying attention to all this stuff. This one right here is another good one. Then I'll move on to this next article. But stock up on non-perishable food items. This is one of those that's super important, because it's those when you're in a situation where there is a shortage of meat, or shortage of those perishable food items, maybe shortages of vegetables and stuff, you want to have that stuff on your shelves at home, that you can supplement that stuff, that at least you're going to have some food. So that long-term shelf life stuff is super important. The rice, the noodles, the beans, the pastas, the pasta sauce, the canned meats, all of that stuff that will last a long time is super important to have, just in case this stuff, not necessarily for the inflation aspect of it, because a lot of this stuff is kind of cheap anyway, but for the shortages aspect of it, especially grains and stuff like that. You think about that stuff right now with the stuff that's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and how the grain shortages are going to affect a lot of countries severely. I think the wheat and all that stuff, that could make its way to our front door in the near future as well. So with that, I wanted to go through this article. This has got a few good points on it that I wanted to talk about. This has got a few good points in here that I wanted to go over about the preparing for the food shortages in the coming months. It's also got a couple that, I don't know how that would affect us for this current situation, but you never know. Again, this is what Biden said. It's going to be real. So the first one they have here is don't panic buy. Instead buy two. Now, I think there's a middle ground here where I kind of sit on this stuff anyway. The don't panic buy, that's absolutely true, because you don't want to buy 100 pounds of meat, 100 pounds of beef, or 100 pounds of chicken, or 50 pounds, whatever it is, and then have it a week later, the price goes down, or something like that, or it just stagnates, or you don't have a place to put it. But I think the buy two, I think maybe a little more than two. Like the saying goes, two is one is none, right? So buy as much as you feasibly can, given your current situation. I just bought a freezer, a $200 freezer a few months ago, when all of this stuff started, because I want to be able to stock just meat in that freezer, chicken, all of that stuff. So with that, it gives me the opportunity to buy a little bit more. But like I said, make sure you have the room for all of that stuff. Grow a garden. This is one that's kind of tricky, because growing a garden sounds pretty simple on the surface, and everybody should do it and all that stuff you hear all the time. But growing a garden is a little bit more difficult than a lot of people give it credit for. So if you are going to do this, if you've never done it before, don't expect a lot of return on your investment. It's a learning process, and it's something that don't expect, just because you plant tomatoes, just because you plant corn, that you're going to get this great harvest and all that. It doesn't work that way until you learned, different aspects of it. You've got pests, you've got all sorts of different things. We've got, and I'll probably do a video on this a little bit later, I ended up putting, the last couple of years, we've had deer that just annihilated our corn and stuff like that. So I've basically made an 8-foot fence with a roof on it too, because of the magpies and the crows and the squirrels and all that stuff. That I've put in there. That way, the stuff that is really important, that I don't want the animals eating, is going to go in there. Now, if you are just starting out with gardening, squash and stuff like that stuff that's really easy to grow, maybe that's a good idea. But growing a garden, great idea, but don't, make sure your expectations are spot on with that. Another thing, this one, buy locally. I think that's a great idea, but I don't know how that helps with the coming shortages and all that. This one is another one that doesn't really have any. It's not just the food storage, but it is. It's preaching to the choir a little bit with preppers. Make sure it's not just the food that you're preparing. Make sure you've got the gas, the oil, the clothing, the shoes, the medications. All of that different stuff is also important. But this one is a good one that I wanted to talk about, and this is learn preservation skills. Preservation skills, you can take that long-term, that non-perishable food items, you can take that stuff that's got maybe a year or two shelf life, and you can extend that. You can take that stuff with canning and dehydrating and all of that. You can take, maybe you're cooking soups or stews, and you can take that stuff that may last a week or two and turn it into stuff that's going to last a year or two. So a great skill to have, the canning. Now, granted, it does take a lot of work. It's a lot of upfront work. But it is well worth it, especially when you're talking about the situation that we could be facing here in the next few months with the stuff just not being on the shelves at all. If you've got some canned food stuff, if you've got that comfort food, right, the soups and stews and all that stuff that's on your shelf, and you're not just eating pasta every single day, it's going to benefit you. But again, you have to have those skills. You have to have those, cooking from scratch skills, learning how to, do all of this stuff from recipes. Again, and this kind of goes into the recipe thing, buy in bulk and buy whole grains. Whole grains are great if you know how to use them. If you don't know how to, prepare beans, if you don't know any recipes to use that flour or those whole grains, or how to turn out those whole grains into flour, it's a waste of money, a waste of time, and a waste of space to have that stuff. But doesn't mean you shouldn't. It means you should learn that stuff. And I think the next one on this list goes through. The next one is get out of debt. But this one is learn to cook from scratch, and this goes into what I was talking about before. If you understand how to utilize that stuff, then it's great to have those 5-gallon buckets and all of that stuff. If you don't, it's kind of a waste of space. So with us, my grandma used to have her little box with all her recipes and stuff in it. These days we can get on the internet and look stuff up. As preppers, we should, maybe be printing these things off, putting them in a folder or something like that, because granted, the food shortages that we're looking at possibly seeing in the next few months or so, we're not talking about a grid down situation. So you'll still be able to get online and look this stuff up. But as preppers, we always plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? So it is that, why not print those things off just in case this stuff happens. The last one I wanted to talk about on this too is get out of debt, because I think this is one that, 99% of the time I'm saying, get out of debt. Never go into debt. The opposite of preparedness is being in debt. But I think in this situation, this specific situation we're looking at here in the coming months, there may be situations where it is, maybe a good idea. I really struggle saying this stuff, but there are situations where it may be necessary to use your credit card. Maybe that the price of stuff is, or maybe you've seen something where on the East Coast or the West Coast, prices are really going up, and that's going to hit you, but it hasn't quite right yet. Maybe it is a good time to buy a whole bunch of that meat, 100 pounds of something, chicken or beef, and then you don't have to worry about once those prices go up, and hope that you have enough to last until the prices go back down. But again, you're looking at, anytime you put something on a credit card, you're looking at 15, 20%, whatever the interest rate is on that stuff each month. So you're also paying that on top of the price you paid a pound for it. So you got to factor all this stuff in. But again, 99% of the time, I would say don't go into debt doing this stuff. But I think in a situation where you're talking about shortages, you're talking about inflation, you're talking about rising food prices, there may be situations where get it while you can mentality comes into play, where you may need to use those credit cards depending on how much money you have in the bank and stuff. So 99% of the time, I'd say no, get out of debt. Don't use your credit cards. But this situation, it may be one of those situations where you need to. At any rate, that's if you guys have any thoughts on all of this stuff, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. It's just I wanted to go through some of this stuff and talk about it a little bit because I do think it's something I pay attention to on a daily basis coming up because I know that this stuff is the inflation right now. There are no signs to say that it's going to get any better. We are in a recession, regardless what these people say. In my opinion, we are in a recession. It's likely to get worse. The shortages are likely to get worse. So all of this stuff I think is super important right now as preppers to kind of pay attention to this stuff. A lot of people in this country aren't going to pay attention until they go to the store and the food's not there. As preppers, that's kind of like why we get labeled as the whack jobs and all that, is because we're thinking about this stuff right now in advance of, 2-3 months down the line when there's nothing on the shelf. So at any rate, I appreciate everyone. If you haven't subscribed, make sure and subscribe below. We will talk to everyone later, though. Take care and prepare.